Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Career by Design webinar, being one of the few or the only at work. My name is Michelle Rapp, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Career Strategy in the Office of Alumni Relations. And I'm also here with my colleague, Diana Bronchuk, who's going to help us moderate. And I'm particularly excited to have Su Joun here with us today to talk about this important topic and to also hear about your experiences and give you the opportunity to ask questions. I want to tell you about Su Joun's background. She is principal of the Diversity at Workplace Consulting Group and a diversity and inclusion scholar and practitioner with comprehensive senior business leadership and entrepreneur experience in diverse industries. As Vice President of Talent, Diversity, and Inclusion at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, Su led the enterprise diversity and inclusion, talent acquisition, performance management and leadership development, and associate engagement teams. Under Su's leadership, meaningful changes were made to the recruiting process, talent and career development programming, diversity and inclusion initiatives, succession planning, and organizational accountability. Significant results included increased people of color hiring, increased women in senior leadership roles and on the board, and better measurable inclusion within the company. Su currently serves as the Vice Chair for the Center for Collaborative Leadership at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and is a member of the Board of Directors of the Boston chapter of the National Association of Asian American Professionals. Su has a MS in Nonprofit Management from Northeastern and an MBA from Suffolk University. We're excited to have her here today to share her expertise.
Hello, how are you? Good to be with all of you today. This is Su, and thank you so much for the introduction, Michelle. So again, Su Joun, my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and today we're going to talk about being one of the few or the only at work. So let's dive deeply into that a little bit more. Okay, so let's start with what it means to be the only or one of the few. So when we say only or one of the few, we're obviously going to be focusing on race, gender, age, those type of demographic things that are usually discussed in this type of setting. But it could also be that you are the only one with a degree that is not scientific in a science organization, or you could be the only introvert in an entire organization of extroverts, or you could be the smallest one or the tallest one or any other kind of visible demographic. Or it may feel like, and not everyone else may be aware, but it could be due to your sexual identification or your sexual orientation, or in terms of disabilities, some visible or invisible disabilities. So whatever it is that makes you the only or one of the few is what we're going to be discussing here today. So right off the bat, I want to start off that if you are one of the few, and we're talking about extreme minority group, right? When you're really one of the few, chances are if you're one of the few, you will always be in situations in that organization where you're the only. So if you're one of the few, in certain meetings, you may be the only. In certain departments, you may be the only. So I often find that if you're at any time you're one of the few, you're also very often the only in many different situations. So the realities, as you see on the slide, the realities of being the only and one of the few are the following things that I listed below. So it turns out being excluded for anything actually causes not only emotional pain, but actual physical pain. It's that acute. And I just wanted to put that out there right away to acknowledge that this is real. Feeling like you're not included as part of any group setting. So if you think back to childhood, I have vivid memories of not being included to certain parties, not being included to certain lunch tables, being the last one picked to play sports, or whatever it may be, not feeling included, that kind of feeling like you are not part of the group or a clique, it actually does cause not only deep emotional pain, but also actual physical pain. And the effects are long lasting, like any other traumatic experiences. So if you feel excluded constantly over your lifetime, it does build up and it causes people to form certain adaptive behaviors. which we'll talk about as well. So being in the extreme minority causes, and these are obviously all focused on the workplace, because that's what this webinar is about. The number one thing that I hear from Michelle described in my bio that I worked at Blue Cross, and I had worked in other organizations, and even in my current role now, when we work with different companies, many people talk to us about their career. And very often, if they're one of the few or the only, the first thing they tell us about is their lack of ability to get opportunities, whether the opportunities is promotions or being on a project or being able to be on hot clients' accounts or whatever it may be. And the reason why, when you kind of deep dive into it, is because of hesitation. And when I say hesitation, I mean this. When you're one of the few or the only, you're spending an incredible amount of your energy and intelligence and emotional presence looking around and trying to understand how everything works. So think of it this way: when you're like the new person that goes to a party and you walk into this party and you don't know anyone, you start to look around and go, okay, where's the food? Are people drinking? What kind of drinks are they holding? Are people chatting? Are you allowed to have more than one piece of shrimp? What's going on? And you're spending so much time trying to understand how people are interacting there that you actually don't spend that much time having fun. So at the workplace, when you are the only or one of few, you walk into the workplace intentionally or unintentionally, you're observing who says what, how are things being done, who goes to meetings, how do people dress, how do people talk, how are emails written, how are meetings run, who gets heard, who doesn't, and you're trying to understand all of that because you don't feel comfortable and it feels unfamiliar. And naturally, the human reaction is when you're surrounded by others, whatever that group of others may be, you are very aware of your own presence and your lack of being like the others. So it causes hesitation. And when you hesitate at the workplace, you don't get opportunities. So let's bring it home. What I mean by hesitation is you're in a meeting and you're watching so much about the dynamics of the meeting that you don't raise your hand to volunteer. You may not speak up first because you're not sure if you should say anything. You're constantly second guessing yourself, which means you lose out on opportunities. The other thing that I wanted to point out is then people do something that I call overcompensation. It sort of tries to autocorrect. Or in many cases, what happens is they overcorrect. So when people are only or one of the few at the workplace, they do the following things to overcompensate for that fact. One, they could try to assimilate completely into what the majority of the workforce looks like. So really looking at everyone and going, okay, they're all wearing navy blue suits. I'm gonna go buy and get a navy blue suit. Or I noticed that everyone is very polite and doesn't really do a lot of confrontation. I'm gonna adapt that way. Or I noticed people write emails with 3 bullets each and not long paragraphs. I'm gonna adapt to that. I noticed everyone signs their emails here best. I'm gonna do that. So very slowly as well as quickly, people adapt and absorb and convert themselves into something else. The other way people overcompensate for this is to do the opposite of that and constantly tout and exhibit their individuality. And so those are the ones where we see, or we ourselves have been one of those where we're like, I am Latina, here I am, or I am Asian, here I am, or I'm a woman, here I am, or I am of the LGBT community, and I would be asking, what's going on with diversity inclusion efforts here? Or, hey, is that inclusive to XYZ population? Or, hey, accept me as I am or don't. So those two extremes of compensation, of adapting and assimilating into what the majority culture is, or accentuating the individuality and constantly bring it up, is the other side that it goes to. The other phenomenon that happens is this sense of responsibility for representing everyone else that's like us. So, for example, if you're the only working parent on the sales team You constantly feel like you're representing every working parent in the entire organization or maybe even the entire US workforce. And you feel this need to constantly either behave one way or the other because you're representing everyone. And when you are in a racial or ethnic minority, that also happens. You feel that, oh, I better dress professionally because I'm representing all Asians. I better make sure that I don't have any grammatical errors because I'm representing all immigrants. Or so whatever it is, this constant feeling of that you're representing everybody else behind you. And it is a burden. It's a responsibility, but it is a burden and certainly consumes a lot of your attention and time. And thus leads to the final bullet, which all of this causes tremendous energy drain. The burden of feeling like everything you do is representative of your entire kind takes up so much of your senses and thinking that takes up a huge much of your battery. If you're either overcompensating or one way or the other, assimilating into something you're naturally not takes a huge amount of energy. Not to mention a hit at your self-esteem and a sense of self-doubt, which is also part of the imposter syndrome, right? Or if you're overcompensating the other way, trying to constantly remind everyone that you're different, that also takes energy. And constantly hesitating, should I volunteer? Should I not? Should I say something? Should I not? Also takes energy. So at the end of the day, what happens is, this one gentleman said it to me best. He says, by the time I show up to work, Sue, I only have 70% battery life. It's like a smartphone where the background apps are sucking up all the batteries. And even though it's fully charged, you're starting with 70%. So that, in essence, is the reality of being the only or one of the few. Not only do you have the trauma for being excluded over your lifetime, but also all these different phenomenons that happen while you're at the workplace um, is what you're dealing with. The next bullet is being seen as a risky hire, uh, as if the energy drain is not enough and the pain of being excluded is not enough, and also the constant wondering of, am I being excluded because I'm a, that also takes a toll on your energy and your psyche. But then oftentimes, if you're one of the few or the only, rather people may tell you or not, there is this feeling of, hey, was that person hired only because X? Called tokenism, right? A token hire. So I know we've been really focusing on diversity inclusion. Was she hired because she was a woman? Was she hired because she's Black? Was she hired because she's a Latina? Was he hired because he's part of the LGBT community? Is he hired because he's African American? Whatever it is, this feeling of not only worry that you may have been hired and be a token hire, but the reality of the other side is often people see the one or one of the few as being a token hire. Also, studies have shown that if you are an outlier, it's automatically seen as a risk. Anytime you are an outlier, it's automatically seen as a risk. So all of those combine to be seen as a risky hire. And then the last bullet that I'll go to at this slide, and then I would love to hear from everyone else, is we're often coached and mentored to act like the majority. So if you are the only introvert in the sales organization, most likely someone takes you aside and said, come here, I want to give you some tips to be successful here. And all the tips that they're giving you, in essence, is to act like an extrovert. So you're being coached to act like what everyone else acts like. And the flip side of that is if you're a woman and you are hired to be a marketing director, or maybe you're in IT where it's a predominantly male dominated field, you are pulled aside and then coached, or you're assigned a mentor to teach you how to be successful here, which then in essence is trying to have you practice the traits of what the majority does. It's a very interesting phenomenon because people may even hire you because of your uniqueness, but then once you're hired, they coach you and mentor you to be successful, which case that really means to be like everybody else. So those are some of the realities of being the only and one of the few. I would love to hear other people's voices and thoughts. Have you experienced any of these, or have you experienced other things that has not been discussed so far? And I'm going to be silent for a while because I don't mind waiting for those introverts to form a thought.
Everybody can type in the chat box, and we already have one comment saying that it is exhausting and not sustainable.
That is absolutely correct. It is, as we said before, it takes a huge amount of energy drain, and it is not successful. And then people kind of get burnt out, and they end up usually leaving. So often organizations will say, we have a turnover issue with people of color. We have a turnover issue with women. We have a turnover issue with millennials. We have a turnover issue with whatever. And when that group that they're describing is in the very extreme population of minority, when I say minority, I'm talking mathematics here, majority being the bulk of and minority being the smaller group of, they often leave because they're exhausted and they're going to another place to see if that is a better environment. That's usually why there's a lot of turnover. Anybody else experiencing other realities or have experienced some of these?
So we have another comment. I work in a female-dominated workplace where certain female voices dominate the conversation. I am a female and often stay silent because I'm introverted and need to feel safe.
Absolutely. I think what you're describing is both a personality or a train of thought, which is introversion, but also in being dominated by others. And those folks are usually doing most of the talking. There's almost no space for you to get a word in edgewise.
And if everybody needs help finding the chat box, it is the bottom right corner. It's the little icon of the chat bubble. And I see we have a comment being typed right now.
One of the things as folks are typing and continuing to type, what I'm going to do is probably flip over to the next slide because I want to make sure we get through all the various information, and then we also will have some time at the end to share more experiences. But it looks like some comments have come in.
Yeah. So one comment is, it requires you to be hyper vigilant about how you are perceived, not only by the majority, but by your peers of color.
I hear that often because you see, here's the thing. If we talk about the fact that the only and the one of the few feel the sense of burden in representing whatever demographic they're from, other folks who are also in that environment wants to make sure that you're representing your kind, so to speak, well, so that it reflects well on them. So, for example, if three women are in a department of men, and the three are constantly looking at each other and observing each other's behavior to make sure that they're representing all women well, so that the burden is not only shared, it's actually pushed upon someone else's throat to make sure that they feel that sense of responsibility. And so it's a double whammy. You're not only feeling the burden of representing yourself, you're also wanting to make sure that you do proud by those peers within your few group as well. So you're absolutely correct, which also drains energy, by the way.
Okay. Another experience is a general classification of how an African American should behave. Just because we are in a category doesn't mean we all are the same. Diversity is deeper than color of skin.
So true, so true. This is where the word intersectionality has been discussed a lot in the last few years. You could be Black. Some, as you know, some classify as Black, some classify as African American, some classify as Black, Latino, Latina, Hispanic. So you can kind of keep going. But even among the Black African American population, obviously their experiences absolutely matter, their ethnicity absolutely matter. There's even some discussions about American domestic Black African American versus immigrant Black African American, and how there are differences there. But you could also be part of the LGBT community. You could be introverted. You could have so on. You could be a working parent, so on and so on. You're absolutely right. Just like I describe my pronouns as she, her, and hers, so clearly you know I'm female. But I certainly am not like every other woman, and nor can I speak for every other woman. And in fact, that's also another burden that sometimes we carry is we're asked to speak on behalf of. So often people go to other Black African American folks who are in the organization and say, hey, do you want to write an article about African American history, Black History Month? So yeah, very great comment. And then I see another.
Yep. Another person commented, or if you're aligning too much with the majority and not with them, the question of is your loyalty.
All sorts of absolutely true as well. There are these terminologies, I'm sure, that you guys have heard. I won't repeat it here, but most of it is a cookie. It's a certain cookie terminology that's used for people who are person of color on the outside, but is acting like a white person on the inside. There are terminologies like that for many different demographics that sort of is implying that you're aligning with the majority and forgetting your roots and from where you've come from. So that's absolutely another burden and drain. So I think you could start to see on one hand, so here's this tug, right? On one hand, we're expected to be loyal and represent our community well. And on the other hand, you're being coached and mentored to behave like the majority in order to be successful. And oftentimes you're wondering, how much of myself should I diminish, sacrifice, change to be successful? And that's where the words authenticity and ability to bring your whole self to work comes in. So what I'm thinking is we could always go back to some of those comments later. Thank you everyone for sharing them. I'm going to go on to the next slide because I also think I saw a question that talks about, so what do we do about all this? All right, here we go. So how to thrive. How to thrive is being one of the only and being the only, but also those of you who may be on this session is hoping to be an ally to those who are only or one of the few. Here are some things that you can also kind of help them through or create some environments or make suggestions in your organizations of how to be more inclusive and how to retain and how to get most of. So here's the scenario that I'm just going to throw out to you, and then we'll get into how to thrive. So for example, let's say you're hired, you're brought into the organization, and then let's assume for a moment, and I realize everyone experiences things to different degrees, but let's say you start to experience some or most of or all of everything that was on the previous slide. So you are a woman and you've been brought in for your qualifications. You find that you're the only or one of few. And then what happens because of those realities, chances are to be successful, you have to work so much harder to show that you are as qualified as everyone else. But also you have to work so much harder because you're doing all this work on top of all the other energy drains that's already somewhat limiting you. And what happens with that is sometimes that level of hard work and hours and emotional presence is not sustainable, which causes sometimes the performance to go down, or which causes people to misinterpret your reactions, or what causes people to be asking of you to do very overly simplistic things and they can't understand why you can't just do it. So for example, if I say, Michelle, we need to just hear your voice more at meetings. it sounds like well, of course, I'll just speak up more at a meeting. But when you have all those other realities tugging at you, it's not that simple. So your leader may be saying, or your manager may be saying, why can't you just do the simple thing I'm asking you to do? And sometimes your performance suffers. So, and then what usually happens is the organization or the leader would say, well, we tried hiring a woman for this role, it didn't work. We tried hiring a XYZ for this, it didn't work. As if we count, we don't count, we don't say, hey, we just hired someone from the minority demographic and they didn't work. That rarely happens, right? We always say, we just hired someone from this minority demographic and it didn't work out. So, how to thrive. We broke it up into 3 different buckets. So I'm going to start with create allies. So if you're the only or one of few, first thing you want to do is give yourself an anchor, I call it, because a lot of times we tend to float and don't feel a sense of belonging. If you think about that party where you don't know anyone kind of thing, you need to find a sofa to sit down and some people to talk to is basically what I'm trying to say. Is so seek out others to have a community and to have a sense of belonging. And those others could be people that are demographically like you. Those others could be people who are deliberately not of the same demographic as you. People could be ones who started on the same day as you and you saw them during orientation. Or it could be employee resource groups, which I'll talk about later. Or it could be people who have similar roles as you. Whatever you feel that you could reach out to, use that intersectionality and say, okay, I'm going to reach out to people and individuals who I feel some sense of connection with. Maybe I am a Black African American female, but I'm a working parent, and I'm going to reach out to a white female who I know is also a working parent and commiserate and share tips on how to balance work and life. Or I could be a female IT manager who is an introvert, and I may reach out to a male IT professional who I also notice is an introvert. So whatever it is, those are obviously silly examples, but look for those folks that you feel some connection with on some level. Some of it could be obvious and demographic in nature, but some of it could be other things. And have lunch, have coffee, all of those things that people encourage you to do, so you feel a sense of anchor. You feel like you know some people. You feel a sense of belonging. And you have, in essence, some go-to people. Someone you can say, hey, good morning, have a good day to. Second thing is often, it's funny. Employee resource groups are very valuable for many different reasons. Some organizations call them business network groups, some call them affinity groups, whatever it's called. Basically, these are those organizations that are usually created around a demographic. So you'll see a Black professionals network, or a woman empower group, or a LGBTA pride group, or a veterans group, or working parents group, or whatever it may be. It's usually sort of around a demographic or a certain population kind of thing. So what I would also always do is encourage those who are the only or one of few to join many of them. Now, you can't join all of them because you exhaust yourself, but be an ally to others is in essence what I'm saying, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's really finding different places for that community and belonging, and people seeing you outside of your skin deep demographic. So if you're a woman and you're straight, why not join an LGBTQA employee resource group in addition to your women's group to make sure that you're not being disloyal to your group? If you are Asian, why not also join an African American employee resource group as well as your Asian resource group? Again, to hear the views and points of view of others, as well as to continue to figure out ways that you are showing and displaying different aspects of yourself that is not only skin deep, but also, interesting thing is, if you're one of the few, if those few partnered with other fews, who partnered with other fews, who partner with other fews, you see you'll create a few majority. And so there is something about allyship. Instead of kind of um, elbowing each other sometimes for space, for the scarcity of attention and resources, if we actually join forces, if you're the only who connects with another only, now there's a pair. And if you are a pair that connects with another only, you now have a trio. That's called a group. So continuing to connect those bubbles, if you will, to create a bigger bubble. The third thing is be strategically visible. Now, this is a heavy one, meaning it's a little bit more than it implies. You already feel like you're visible anyway because you're one of the few or the only. So you feel like everyone sees you. You're sort of an outlier. You're that green M&M in a bowl of red M&Ms kind of feeling. You already feel visible anyway. You feel like the spotlight's on you anyway. Some overcompensate by trying to blend in, and some, again, overcompensate by making it redder or greener in that bowl of red M&Ms. But is to be strategically visible. And what I mean by that is not only constantly we feel this need to represent, but also if you have that visibility and you feel like you have it, then own it and use it as a platform. And what I mean by that is if you're the only woman in a room full of IT, share those perspectives. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, use the spotlight to take the mic to say, you know what, I don't believe this project should go forward, or I do believe this project should go forward, or I have an idea that I think we should consider, or whatever you want to do, rather it's for cause that helps your community, or rather it's for a cause that helps the business, or rather it's for a cause to make the right decision in a company when it relates to a business decision, whatever it is. If you think there's a spotlight on ya, use that spotlight for something. So that's what I mean by become strategically visible. The other thing I want to talk about is bring yourself to work. But before maybe I go there, I'm just doing a quick time check. Before I go there, is there any particular comment or question that you feel we should address before we move on?
We had an earlier question. What steps do you suggest taking before making the decision to leave an organization?
The simplest answer is if you feel that you have to exert so much energy just to show up, which leaves very little room to be successful and work on those things that will make you successful, it's time to leave. Because whatever you're doing to be successful is certainly not sustainable. So that often translates into other words that people use. I don't feel accepted. I don't feel appreciated. I feel overlooked. Whatever those words are, in reality, if just to be in that environment drains so much of your energy that you don't have enough energy to be good at what you do and shine and get your career dreams fulfilled, then it's time to move.
A comment that just supports everything you just said, I have found that I like to act and operate similar to Switzerland in saying that I would like to be seen as an individual first, outside of my group, and enjoy the company of others, those like me, but also with those individuals with whom I have similar interests. That would be ideal, but I think it's great that you mentioned setting your mode of operation. Mm-hmm. I think having your own personal code of conduct and ethic keeps you grounded in who you are or who you know you are.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's a perfect segue into the box that says bring yourself to work. And one could say it, authentic self to work and all of that kind of stuff. Now, I'll be very blunt and honest. I've been in HR and I've been on the business leader side of things. So obviously, we all know, rather you're part of the majority or minority, you can't ever really bring your entire 100% of your authentic self to work. So for example, if I tend to swear all the time and that's how I communicate, maybe I probably can't bring that part to work, right? Or maybe I like to only wear flip-flops and shorts. Either I find a work culture that accepts that, or if I took a job at an insurance company or a corporate company that's client facing, I have to adapt and not be able to wear and can't wear shorts and flip-flops. So those are silly examples to say that I can't bring 100% of my authentic self to work, but I should be able to bring majority and bulk of myself to work. And what you're striving to do is get as close to 100% as you darn can. So if you're able to bring 50% of yourself to work, look for an organization or a role, or departments, or find a leader, or do these things that I'm going to list for you, so you could bring 60% of yourself to work. And if you're 60, you want to find a place where you could bring 70% of your work and keep going. Because I'll tell you why. For the greater good, I'm going to talk a little bit about the greater good while I'm usually focusing on individual today. But the greater good is if you all assimilate, if every few assimilates, and if every one, the one who's the only, assimilates, that expectation will continue and that culture will continue, which means every other new person that comes in has to assimilate. But if you actually display more of yourself, and more of you display more of yourself, then the culture should shift and it'll be that much more comfortable for others. So here you go. How to bring yourself to work. Share your perspective and ideas. Don't hesitate. You were hired because you were qualified. End of story. And don't even go past the first 2 words or 3 words. You were hired, period. You already were accepted into the university, so to speak. You already met the criteria to be here, right? So you are here. Whatever reason is, you are here. There's a little red dot that says you are here. You are here. So share your perspectives, share ideas. If you came from a industry that's different than the one you're in, talk about that and say, hey, when I was in retail, this is how we did sales. Hey, when I was in healthcare, this is how we did sales. At the startup that I was in, this is how we had a very slimmed down process. And it could also be, I come from this community where, so for example, it turns out that a lot of immigrant population, the older immigrants, tends to hide their health ailments from their doctors. So some of them, for example, only want the doctor's praise. So for my mother, for example, every time she goes to the doctor, she tells him all the good stuff she's done to maintain her health. I've been eating so well, I walk, I don't have salt. And when it comes to talking about what her issues are, she hesitates because she doesn't want to look bad to her doctor, which is now it could be both a personality and a cultural trait. But let's say there are certain things that is a predominant trait of your culture. Share those perspectives. For example, a lot of communities whose English is not their first language, they bring their children to their doctors to interpret for them. That's a phenomenon. Share those perspectives as you look at maybe access to care if you're insurance. The second bullet is raise your hand. Raise your hand for opportunities. For every time you're going, should I? So I won't go crazy. How about this? For every time you're asking yourself, should I volunteer? Should I raise my hand? For every other time, do it. Okay? So the first time you say, should I volunteer? Maybe you hesitate and you don't. The very next time you're asking yourself, should I? Raise your hand. Skip the next one. Raise your hand for the next one. However, whatever formula you want to use, rather it's for the every third time you hesitate, you want to raise your hand, but raise your hand. But be picky. Don't volunteer for organizing holiday parties all the time. Don't volunteer for taking meeting notes all the time. Don't volunteer. Because what we have a tendency to do is when we are the only or one of few, we want to demonstrate our value and contribution. Well, if you continue to show your value and contribution in administrative tasks, you'll be seen as only being good and willing to do administrative tasks. I am joking, but I'm also serious. If you volunteer to do a holiday party one year, they will keep coming back to you to do that holiday party because they'll say, no one does it like you do. Okay? And so continue to raise your hand for opportunities, but make sure you raise your hand for visible opportunities, those high profile opportunities like making a presentation to senior leaders or being on a board or going on an external panel. Raise your hand for those. Just as you would to raise your hand to be the leader of an employee resource group, or to take meeting notes, or to put together a working group. Okay. The third thing I would end with that, bringing yourself to work, is set your mode of operation. Here's why. And I even put in quotation mark, this is my preferred method, and do it as soon as possible. The sooner you do it at the beginning of your tenure at an organization, the better this will work for you. For the most part, the person you report to tends to function and have a work style of the majority. Okay. And they're going to expect you to do the work in the way that most other people do it. Let's call it work style, for example, right? We all talk about work style. The way Michelle does something may be very different than the way I do something. But if I'm Michelle's leader, without meaning to or not, I'm going to evaluate her on how she did it the way I would have done it. So set the tone from the beginning, or whenever you can, reset and say, if someone says, so let's say Michelle's my leader, let's flip that role for a moment. And Michelle says, I would like you to manage this project, Sue. Instead of asking, how would you like me to do it? Or waiting for her to tell me how to do it, I may say, in this situation, Michelle, I would love to manage this project. Let me tell you how I usually approach projects. Here's my thinking. Does that make sense? And then you really, in essence, have not only gotten, quote unquote, permission to do it your way, but you've also set up the expectation with your leader to not expect you to do it the way she would have done it. You see what I'm saying? So if you're running an event and someone says, hey, you want to run the sales conference this year? You say, yes, I would love to run the sales conference. Here's how I would do it. Here's what I was thinking. So try to set your mode of operation quickly and stick with it and keep sharing that, because then they're not expecting you to do it their way. I'll tell you one more little tidbit about that. It's harder. If I'm halfway through the project and Michelle goes, why are you doing this project this way? That's a very difficult conversation than if I already told her in the beginning how I expect to do it. And also, if the way I said it, of how my approach is not the way she decided to do, she wanted to do it, then we could have that conversation at the beginning as opposed to halfway through the project. Any particular comment or question we should address before we go on to the last box?
Related to the earlier question about leaving an organization, once you make the decision to leave an organization, what steps do you suggest taking to disconnect from the current exhausting work environment in order to shine in an interview?
I'm going to date myself, but those of you who remember the show Facts of Life, there's a little lyric that says, you take the good, you take the bad, facts of life. I say no in this case. You just take the good of whatever previous organization you just left. You just take the good of the previous organization you and leave the bad. So take whatever learnings, great relationships that you had. So here's the thing. If you had a bad relationship with the real senior leader, leave it alone. And you had a fantastic relationship with the mid-level leader, keep that. So keep the good relationships, keep the good things you've learned, keep the good skill sets that you learned, and take those and lessons learned to your next organization. So that's how I would answer that question. The other thing is, I noticed that many of you are from Massachusetts. Massachusetts, for example, is a very small community. So obviously, you don't want to burn the bridges, so to speak, but there's nothing wrong with leaving the organization that you had a bad experience in way, way back in your rearview mirror. And if you do need references, you'll have remember the names of the ones you had good relationships with and use that as a reference. So for example, I have been a reference for many different people, for many different organizations as a colleague. So many people have listed me on their reference sheet. I haven't worked for them, they haven't worked for me, but I am listed there as a colleague because they know that relationship is good. All right, so let's move on to the last box, and maybe we could explore that a little bit more. But is demand your shot. So your shot, obviously from Hamilton. don't, don't waste your shot. So demand your shot at whatever, right? Your opportunity. So request opportunities. Request opportunities. Request opportunities. Now that's different than demand. And for many of us, request and demand means the same thing. It actually does not. Requests is not a demand, and a demand is not a request. So what I would say is request opportunities. Things like, I would like to join you at that meeting. I would like to join you at that conference. I would like to join you at that project. I would like to, instead of, I would like to go do it, which in essence, you may be saying, I want to replace you. So things like, use the words like, I would like to join you. Because no one likes to give up their position or spot or shot or any of those things, seats. So things like, I would like to join you. Start with that, and then you could talk about, then you can move on to like, I want to go to, and by all means do that. But if you're not sure and you feel a little hesitant, then start with the words, I would like to join you in that meeting. I would like to join you on that project. I would like to join you on that planning committee. I would like to join you at that event. Amplify, ally, advocate for others. So many of us, and those who are female, knows this phenomenon, and there's been actually research done on this. A lot of times females have difficulty advocating for themselves, but they're so good at advocating for others. So use that to show your visibility. So if you are a female and you want to advocate for people of color, do that, and be the passion and be the ally for others. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain those 3 A's first. So first is amplify. Amplify means the following. This is actually from the Obama administration, where a group of women felt that in government they weren't always being heard, as well as others in meetings, similar to that dominated culture and having difficulty getting a word in edgewise comment that we got from one of the attendees earlier. So what they decided to do is make sure that they amplify each other in meetings. So for example, I'll say, if I notice that Michelle said something and no one's really hearing her, I'll say, I noticed that Michelle had an idea, I would love to hear it. I noticed that Diana had a thought, I would love to hear it. So it does not mean you agree. You're just basically amplifying that person's voice. Now, the opposite could also happen. I see no reason why you can't ask someone to amplify you. So for example, let's say Diana and I are about to go into a meeting and I've been having trouble being heard for whatever reason. I may say, Diana, would you mind amplifying me at this meeting? Nothing like, having a little, that's what a pre-meeting is, you all. That's what a pre-meeting is. People have pre-meetings all the time. Might as well use a pre-meeting to create an amplifier. The other thing is ally or ally, which in essence is like amplification with agreement in it. So I agree with Michelle's idea. I would love to hear more about it. Or I share the concerns of that community. I would like to figure out ways to eliminate some of those barriers. That kind of thing. And then advocate is obviously more forceful than even agree, that rather they're in the room or not, you're willing to speak on their behalf. And Michelle's not here today, but she had a fantastic idea last week and I want to make sure we talk about it some more. Or it could be, Diana, I know she's new to this organization, but she brings an incredible background and I think she deserves a shot and be on this project. Get a sponsor, not a mentor. Very quickly, there is a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Studies have shown that women, and I would even argue people of color, tends to be over-mentored but under-sponsored. There are a lot of statistics that show that men are sponsored more than women. And basically the difference is the mentor is supposed to be the one that tells you about things to be successful that your manager wouldn't. So things that would make you shine or give you access or give you information about things. And these are my words. I always say a mentor is the one who's going to make you bright and shiny. Sponsor gets you when you're bright and shiny and thinks you're so bright and shiny without flaws even that they're willing to speak on your behalf and say, hey, we should give Diana that opportunity, or Michelle's awesome, we need to put him on that. And often men have sponsors and it usually works this way. He's a great guy, we should give him a shot. That's a sponsor. You'll be amazed how many succession planning has been based on those words. He's a great guy, he should get a shot. So if you have mentors, great. Ask if some of them could be your sponsors, or deliberately seek a sponsor, or say to your manager in your career conversation and say, I would love to, thank you for giving me these mentors. I would love to now, I need your help in finding a sponsor. And then the last thing is don't settle. And I use the words, I need more than that. I need more than that. So for example, if someone gives you a title change but no salary, you say, thank you so much for making me a senior associate director, but I notice it comes with no salary increase. I need more. I would like to talk about that. I need more than a title raise. Or if someone gives you a salary raise but no title, and you say, I really appreciate the $5,000 increase you gave me, I would love to have a title increase that goes with that. I need more than a salary increase. So don't settle is not the same as demand. Act like you are advocating for someone else, except that someone else is you. And those of you who need help with negotiating salaries, there are tons of free salary negotiation workshops. Just go to the AAUW website, and there is a slew of Boston area workshops at libraries, at community centers and organizations, after hours, before hours, during lunch, and it's free. It's an hour, and you can go and see how to negotiate your salary. So those were my things that I wanted to share with you. Is there any comments or questions we should be answering?
Somebody had a comment about the earlier conversation about when leaving an organization, and they said that they literally created an exit strategy for themselves. They made a private list of everything that they needed to do to feel like they were leaving on good terms, and every time they checked off something on that list, it boosted their morale because it was doing something good for themselves and maintaining their professional presence.
I love this community that I'm seeing here, by the way. And then I saw someone saying, I'll send you that list if you want it. And they said, send it to me, and they already did. So yes, I would agree, is have an exit strategy in terms of what is it going to take? What are the commitments that the organization or my leader has made to me? And if they're not meeting those, at what point do I decide to not wait and leave? Because constantly deciding to leave for 3 years is basically the same as making a decision not to leave. So having an exit strategy and a checklist, I think, makes perfect sense, as well as why not have a checklist of things you do as you go into an organization, or as you take on a new role, or as you switch departments.
Can you please repeat the meaning of a sponsor?
Absolutely. So sponsor is someone who thinks you're so fantastic that they're willing to advocate for you even without you in the room. And the difference between a sponsor and a mentor is supposed to improve you. Sponsor is meant to just advocate for you, as you are already.
Somebody earlier said that they really loved the comment, amplify, ally, and advocate for others.
Yeah. So even if you can't do all three, you could at least amplify, right? I mean, it's again that if you're good at advocating if you're good at standing up for others, use that to also then create a brand for yourself. And that is also part of being strategically visible. So at a minimum, you could amplify.
Related to that, how can one support or amplify a colleague who is being inappropriately criticized outside of her presence?
Depends on how bold you are and how angry you get. But so to use a mild scenario, or to use a scenario of the folks that I'm physically seeing in front of me. So let's say I notice that Diana is constantly talking negatively about Michelle when Michelle's not around. I could do one of two things. I can say, Diana, I don't believe that's fair to Michelle, and I really don't want to hear it anymore. Or at least just end with, I don't believe that's being fair to Michelle. And if you have some feedback to give, you may want to actually give it to Michelle directly. The other one is, the other way I could handle that is to actually go to Michelle and not say, Michelle, do you know what Diana's saying about you? That's called gossip. But if I really want to be a helpful colleague to Michelle, is that I may go to Michelle and say, just to let you know, there's some negative comments being made about you without you being present, and would love to figure out a way to support you through that. So I think there are two ways to do it. You can call the person out on the spot and say, it's not being fair to this person who's not in the room. I believe we should stop this conversation. As well as, if you wish to, and or go to the person who's being talked about and let them know that there are some things that are being discussed and they should be aware that it could actually damage their brand. Obviously, there are consequences to both. I don't want to be naive about that, because the other person may say, well, I'm never telling you anything if you're going to shut me down like that, or wow, you overstepped your bounds of whatever, telling me that it's not fair to talk about this person who's not in the room. So you have to ask yourself, how can you say it in a way, and how can you do it in a way that will not be offensive, but still feel like if you don't say it, you'll kind of hit yourself later. But at the same time, I also understand the realities of a paycheck. So you have to make your decision for yourself if it's worth it or not. And then if you go and tell Michelle that other people are talking about her, the first thing Michelle's going to say, who's talking about me? And you won't be able to give too many details. I have done it a few times in my work life, and one went really badly to the point where she wouldn't leave me alone. She constantly saying, who said it? What? And then the other two actually went well, where I could actually say, Michelle, I noticed that they're questioning your skill sets. I noticed that they're questioning your loyalty to the organization, or I noticed that you question their. So I actually give her some feedback about what's being said without trying to be so specific that she could tie it back to the person who's talking. However, I have to put my HR hat on. If Diana is being incredibly vicious and personal about Michelle, I have to ask myself, is that something I should report to HR, where it's not just about work performance, there's something else there, and that maybe HR should get involved.
Can you speak about the value of associations outside your company?
The value of associations outside your company. Oh, goodness, they're very valuable. So the number one way to get a job is network, right? So this is how the saying goes. You get a job based on who you know, and you get promoted based on who knows you. So, because most of the time your promotability is discussed without you being in the room. So, again, the saying goes, you get a job based on who you know, and you get promoted based on who knows you. So constantly creating associations and networking outside your company is very valuable for the following reasons. Number one, your network expands, and so you become aware of other opportunities. Number two, I don't care if you're a rock star in your organization or if you've been there for 20 years and you feel rock solid. Nothing is guaranteed in organizations anymore. So if you have all your organizations and your network within your current workplace, that is too naive and too risky. You need to meet people and have network outside of the company that you're working for. Those are the reasons why you should go to a networking event. Those are the reasons why you should try to get opportunities and projects to work outside of your organization and with external entities as much as you can. And I would cultivate those relationships. Also, there's nothing wrong with asking someone outside the company to be a mentor of yours. Okay. We have 1 minute left. Well, should we answer one more question, or should we wrap up? Whichever.
A lot of people have said that they've really enjoyed this presentation, and we will be sending out a link of the recording to everyone. But definitely, it sounds like people have really enjoyed this community atmosphere. And so, is there any last minute advice that you would give?
Whatever community you felt here may have been your only time you actually felt a sense of belonging and a place where you could actually talk about this stuff. The interesting thing about being the only and one of few is you don't have that many people to talk about your experiences with. So I would say continue to leverage the community you've built here on this webinar, but also continue to build your community within organizations and your community outside of organizations. Give yourself a sense of belonging that actually will ease on the drain of energy. It will actually put energy back when everything else is depleting it. So that probably is my last thing I want to say.
Well, thank you, Sue. I really appreciate the depth of your knowledge and experience. You have a very grounded way of speaking about these complex issues, and I think you presented some very in-depth and unique perspectives here. So I think you gave us a lot to think about, gave people a lot of clear action steps to go out and try many of these suggestions. So I greatly appreciate your wisdom and your willingness to share. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And thank you all for the great conversation and comments and for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the week.